Dear friends, thank you for being here today as we gather to celebrate the life of Alathea Clymer. We come together in grief, acknowledging our loss. May God grant us grace that in pain we may find comfort, in sorrow, hope, and in death, new life. I invite you, as we go through our service today, to join along in any of the singing. Some of these songs might be very familiar to some of you. We'll have a few songs that we sing together from the hymnal. We'll have an ensemble sing some of Alathea's favorites, and if you know, you are always welcome to join in. As we read and sing and listen to these words today, let us celebrate the presence of Alathea and her lasting influence in our lives. I invite you to stand as you're able for our opening song. We'll sing this one together. It's in the red hymnal, so you'll see it either on the seat next to you or in front of you. It's called This Is My Song. It's on page 437, and this is one of Al's favorites, number 437. This is my song. I invite you to stand as you're able. You may be seated.
I'll be reading the first poem today from Al's beloved poem book by Emily Dickinson. I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeples swam in amethyst, the news like squirrels ran. The hills untied their bonnets, the bobolink's begun. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. but how he set I know not. There seemed a purple stile, which little yellow boys and girls were climbing all the while. Till when they reached the other side, a dominie in gray put gently up the evening bars and led the flock away. Not in Vain by Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I could ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin onto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Out in the Fields with God by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. The little cares that frettered me, I lost them yesterday. Among the fields, above the sea, among the winds at play, among the lowing of the herds, the rustling of the trees, among the singing of the birds, and the humming of the bees. The foolish fears of what may happen, I cast them all away. Among the clover-scented grass, among the new-mown hay, among the rustling of the corn where drowsy poppies nod, where ill thoughts die and good are born, out in the fields with God.
The first scripture is Matthew 5, 1 through 12. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
I'll be reading one of Mom's favorite pieces from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This was her book, gifted to her in 1953. And the page is marked with one of her many little notes, little prayers, little thoughts. Then a woman said, Speak to us of joy and sorrow. And he answered, Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? When you are joyous, look deep into your heart, and you will find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. And when you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you will see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Some of you say, joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say unto you, they are inseparable. Together they come. And when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Verily, you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and your joy. Only when you are empty are you at standstill and balanced. When the treasure keeper lifts you to weigh his gold and his silver, needs must your joy or your sorrow rise or fall.
church in the vale.
This reading is from Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace.
The eulogy today was a joint effort between Alathea's daughter and her sister. So I share these words with you from her family and those who love her and have known her best. Known affectionately as Al for most of her life, Alathea Dinslow was born in 1936 with her twin brother Lathrop in Brooklyn, New York. The twins, along with their younger sister Cynthia, were the children of two talented teachers, Cornelius and Christine, who fostered a deep love and fascination for the natural world, music, and beauty in all its forms. Her dad was known as a naturalist back in the 1920s when he founded the Brooklyn Nature Club, This co-ed group of men in white shirts and women in dresses wearing sensible high-heeled shoes would follow him around exploring the many beautiful areas in Brooklyn that were still in their more natural state. Even though he was very soft-spoken and a quiet and private man, he enjoyed leading this group, pointing out things of interest that caught his eye: trees, ferns, insects, birds, lichen. One of the young women also caught his eye, and the rest is history. 3 beautiful children raised to be comfortable and knowledgeable about the natural world, despite being in the middle of a city. The family spent joyful childhood summers and holidays at a log cabin in New Jersey, exploring the woods and nearby lakes. This is where Alathea learned to swim like a fish and eventually became an accomplished synchronized swimmer. It also explains her very precise backstroke technique to those fellow evening lap swimmers in the Homer pool. There are also family stories about various animals in the home, particularly one baby alligator that lived in the bathtub. The kids were taught how to pick it up properly and safely transfer it to the sink before taking showers. Alathea was actively involved in Girl Scouts, Mariner Scouts, and went on to share her love of nature and campfire songs as a leader. She taught many of these songs to her sister, creating a deep lifetime bond between them, filled with cherished melodies. Her scouting experience influenced many life choices, including her studies, career pathways, where she lived, and how she raised her own children. After earning her bachelor's degree from the State University of New York in Albany, she moved west to Oregon and began her teaching career. She was selected to participate in the National Science Foundation Teacher Training Institute, which led to a master's degree in general science with a minor in science education from Oregon State University. She taught school in Oregon and Alaska, ranging from elementary choir to high school biology and everything in between. So, picture a young Miss Denslow, fresh from New York City, at her first teaching job in rural Oregon. She walks into the classroom one day and notices that the students are particularly fidgety. They are all watching her very closely. And so she knows something is up. She sits down at the teacher's desk in the front of the room and opens the top drawer to find a snake. Well, for somebody raised with alligators, this was not a big deal. Much to the surprise of all the students, she gently picked up the snake, calmly identified it, and proceeded to launch into an impromptu lesson on reptiles. The students did not give her any more trouble for the rest of that year. In February 1962, Alathea married James Clymer, a handsome young teacher who was working at the same school as her father. They met when she was back in Brooklyn visiting her parents over the holidays, and they kept inviting him over for dinner. The many adventures of Jim and Al began with a honeymoon trip to Alaska. They fell in love with Homer and arranged to purchase half a homestead near Fritz Creek. And yes, Alathea Street is named after her. It took them a couple of years. Then they made the big move to Alaska in 1964, just a few months after the earthquake. They bravely drove up the Alcan Highway with their 1-year-old daughter and all their possessions in tow. Guess who dictated when they had driven enough for the day and needed to stop for the night? There are many stories about moving north at that time, from the kindness of strangers to learning about high tides and four-wheel drive. Just ask Jim to tell you some more about it. For several years, the young family lived in various places to work at schools in Ninilchik, Moose Pass, and Healy before eventually moving to Homer to stay. When the time came for the birth of their second child, it was a long drive in their Volkswagen Beetle from Ninilchik to the hospital in Homer. The only road to the hospital at that time was Bartlett Street, and it was temporarily blocked for maintenance. When the road crew scrambled to make the road passable, Alathea gave birth to daughter Emily in the back seat of the car with Jim attending. 3 years later, son Walter was born, this time inside the Homer Hospital during normal office hours with Dr. Inabo in attendance. Together, Jim and Al started Fritz Creek Studios, a small commercial print shop, which they operated for almost 30 years. Alathea filled the role of graphic artist, and Jim ran the presses. She transitioned over the years from setting lead type for rubber stamps and hand letterpress wedding invitations to bound community cookbooks and full 4-color brochures. For several years, they printed the Homer Weekly News, which featured her boat sketch on the masthead. She also mastered the original clip art, drawing whatever produce needed to be featured in the grocery store ads each week, plus a few seagulls here and there. Even though it meant running a daily shuttle service out Easton Road to keep up with all the after-school activities, Jim and Al were committed to keeping their children active and involved. Alathea followed in her parents' footsteps, quietly sharing her love of nature and music with her own children. She took a course on the local plants in the 1970s that resulted in a carefully documented native plant collection that was eventually donated to the Pratt Museum. Her kids grew up thinking everybody knew that esquisitum meant horsetail. Alathea was inquisitive, methodical, tenacious, and loved to read. She could expound at length about a variety of topics from the Pleistocene era to the latest in brain research, from the poetry of Emily Dickinson to the scientific name of plants. Although she took pride in never formally learning to read music, she spent her whole life singing, finding both lasting friendships and pure joy. As an original member of the Sweet Adelines group that eventually became known as the Seaside Singers, Alathea was part of a circle of women that shared that passion. They showed up in costume, singing a cappella harmonies at events all over the community for nearly 40 years. In her later years, Alathea combined her botany background with her artistic creativity to design a note card series featuring Alaska wildflowers, berries, and scenic local sketches. She peddled them in her illustrated calligraphy quotes at art and craft fairs all over the state. A self-described compulsive doodler, she was never without a stubby pencil tucked into her tidy bun and a small notepad within reach, jotting down her thoughts, prayers, interesting quotes, field sketches, or working away at a Sudoku puzzle. Sadly, Alathea spent her final decade wrestling with Alzheimer's disease, but she did it her way. There were some bright years spent in assisted living, with Saturday excursions for ice cream or a swing at the playground. Eventually, the time came to move to long-term care. And again, Dr. Inabo was attending. On the day that she was to be admitted, he was ready and waiting, but she kept him waiting and waiting. Rather than ride down that long hallway in a wheelchair pushed by an efficient nurse, she wanted to walk herself down the hall. And so she did, pushing her own wheelchair in front of her. Alathea's positive attitude and grateful heart shone through her entire life. Even when she could no longer walk or talk, she communicated, sometimes with the lift of a single eyebrow. Her caregivers during the final years were compassionate, wonderful, and kind, and many knew the song, "You Are My Sunshine," by heart. Alathea's spirit will be remembered and cherished by many. Her sister writes, she was one of the knowledge keepers, sharing her sense of beauty and appreciation through the gift of her art. I was fortunate to have had Al for a sister, and her memory will continue to sing our songs in my heart, especially whenever I wander around out in the natural world. Rest in peace, dear sister, and thank you for having had the courage to be sincerely your own unique and gifted person within our family. Well, friends, now you have a turn. We have heard from some of the family and friends, Alathea's favorite poems and songs, and some memories of her childhood and life. And now you get a chance to share some of those stories. So if you have a memory or a story of Al that you would like to share, wave at me and I'll bring you the microphone. And I do ask you to speak into the microphone because we are actually live streaming for the family who could not be here. And so that helps the camera pick it up. So if you have a story that you would like to share, let me know and I'll bring you the microphone so that you can tell us.
All right. All right, I will work my way up. We'll start back here with Rita.
Here you go.
Al said that when she went west to teach, I think it was the adults, not the kids who planted the stake, asked her to say peanut butter. I never heard her say it with the New York accent, but I guess it really got a laugh out of those people in Oregon.
Al and I shared one interesting thing. We were both born 1936, so we had that. And we also seemed to have a love for camp songs. And so we gathered many times as a family and as a group and sang those songs. We came to home in 1974, and quickly this church with the Clymers and the Stoltzfuses and the Wises became our family. And for many years, we shared everything in fun and song and a holiday celebration. When Al and Jim bought a large printing press and moved it into their shop, it weighed several tons, I guess. And I showed up with my video camera. And so I taped this and made a movie out of it. And I titled it Our Baby, because I had this picture of Al standing watching this multi-ton beast being moved. But she had her hands clasped and this beautiful look on her face, as if you would welcome a baby.
I am Pat Wise, and I met the Clymer family when we arrived in Homer in early 70s. Walter was in my classroom at East Homer Elementary School, today called Paul Banks Elementary. Emily lived in Fairbanks, still lives in the Fairbanks area, and I would get to see her from time to time. Accidentally, she might be in the bookstore, and I went to the bookstore that day. I want you to remember them. They cannot be with us today, and I feel that. I feel that within myself. And so let's remember them with, if you knew them, Emily with her curly hair, and Walt with his ambition, I'll put it that way. Anyway, and Julia, a dear friend of my daughter, Kathleen, they kind of grew the high school years together and the junior high years together, et cetera, et cetera. And there was actually a group of 5 of you that were very close to each other. And, you know, it means when your kids get close with other kids, you get close to their moms, because moms worry. And so therefore, you need to know, is my daughter safe? Where is she? Is she exactly where she said she was going to be? Et cetera, et cetera. But I will say that both Kathleen and Julia and Shannon and so on and so forth, Mary, were fun, responsible, I'll say young people, and Al was proud of her children, all of them. And that's why I want you to remember that she was the mother of 3, and I feel badly. So if you're watching this, I say hi to you and give you a hug, and Walt, wherever you are today, my thoughts are with you too. Now, Al's from Brooklyn. Did you get that? Do you know how Brooklyn people speak? I'm from Philadelphia. I used to get teased about that, but I'll tell you what, one of my favorite things was asking Al to be Brooklynized when we would get together, and she did a marvelous job in that accent. If you don't know that accent, try to find it sometime. Even Google it. She was an expert at it, and that made her fun. Today's program with remembrances deal with peace. No matter what Al did, that was highlighted. She was a person of peace. And so this is was a perfect theme, Julia, for today. And it is also a reminder that that is the job of our lives. We are to be at peace, and peace with one another, as Al showed.
My sister Ruby wanted to be here today, but she's in Seattle. But she asked me to read some words about Al. She said, for several years while Al lived at the Friendship Center, I would visit her almost weekly. She was always very glad to see me after I told her I was Carl's sister. Each time, we pretty much touched on the same subjects. I was always impressed how often she said what a good life she had experienced. She'd talk about the beauty of the bay and the mountains and her family. But mostly she'd talk about what a wonderful life she had. I admired her for that, and I hope that if I ever get dementia, I will say the same thing. I have many memories of Al, but one that stands out to me was when I spent 5 hours or so with her in the emergency room one time when Julia was out of town. And I said to her, you're going to be given an X-ray. And she looked at me and she said, it's not X-ray, it's X-ray. And every time I say that word, I think of her. I have also really enjoyed the last few days helping Julia go through some of her artwork. And downstairs you'll see that we have some on display. All the way from her field study drawings in black and white to the beautiful cards that I'm sure many or all of you have seen that she produced. And then the collection of quotes and sayings that she would do calligraphy. It was just a wonderful tribute to her to go through that with Julia and some other friends and see that part of her life. She really knew how to find beauty in the everyday plants that were around her and to try to express that in her own artistic way.
I don't have a specific story about Al, but the picture there just captures her for me. Because every time I ever ran into Al, she just had this beatific smile, like she was so happy to see me, or in a choir sitting that she was just so happy to be in that choir singing, and so you just couldn't come into contact with her without feeling better. You just instantly felt better.
We are going to have more time to share downstairs in the reception after the memorial service. I'd like to invite, we got to get some words from Jim.
When we first came to Alaska, back in '56. There wasn't a church here as such. The one previous had burned down. And I remember we helped build the parsonage next door. My son was quite young then, but he was able to do some good things. I remember we had problems putting that top brace up there. And I was one of the few that was willing to get on top of the roof there. It was a little airy, but it was a good trip. The whole trip started in Brooklyn, New York, on the edge of the worst slums there, 22nd Street in Brooklyn. And the Denlos had a house there, and he was a teacher at a private school, K-12, and I was too at the same school. And he kept inviting me over to meet his daughter. I had a pretty bad experience and wasn't really interested, but he kept at it. And I think it was about the third time through. She went back to Oregon, and I thought, no, that's the gal. So I called her, and much to my surprise, she said yes. And but there's one caveat. We have to be married in February. This is about the middle of February at that point. And so our folks didn't have much time to plan much of a wedding, but something like 200 people showed up from all up and down the East Coast. Relatives I'd never met, cousins, nephews. And they actually had to close 22nd Street in Brooklyn, that block there. Police put barricades at either end of it. It was, and the poor caterer, well, he had some experience, but he was running short of food there. But it was a great adventure. And she said that one of the reasons she married me was I was coming to Alaska, or expressed that desire. No idea how to get here. But eventually we worked our way out to Fly, Oregon, and I taught there. And she always got involved with kids. It was neat. And then we just decided that, I came back east, I don't know why, and that didn't last long. And I said, well, I've always wanted to go to Alaska, let's go. She said, absolutely. And she kind of took me back. And so we had an old Studebaker. And I remember we came up, part of the problem was, we got to Anchorage and went to the dealer there. There was one. And it was a diaphragm for the carburetor, and they didn't have any. But they said there's a guy down in Home who can make it. Yeah, it's a rawhide thing, I think. And he said the only way to do this is go down there. And the road from Anchor Point to Homer was virtually non-existent at that time. So at low tide, we crossed the Anchor River Bridge and went down and came in under the bluffs and came up on Captain's Beach there. And I remember we were having a little trouble. Sand was a little deep. And I'd forgotten who it was, but some guy had a chain of horses. And they pulled us up and on to the spit there. And we came into town. And the hotel here was called the Heritage, or what was it called in those days?
Eddie Hotel.
Eddie Hotel. And we took one look at that and decided we'd camp in the van. And it went on from there. Eventually I got a job. I mean, bless Al, she kept with me. Got a job with state operated schools and went up into Healy for a while. And finally she had enough of that, came down to Homer and tried to decide what we were going to do. And I finally got a job, forgot what it was, carpentry, I think. And story went on from there.
So Jim, how long were you and Al married?
Pardon me?
How long were you and Al married? Was it 60 years?
56.
56 years. That is incredible. Bless you, Jim. There's going to be more stories downstairs afterwards. I would like to invite Arlene to come up and speak now. And Arlene, if you would go over here to this microphone.
There was no way that I would do this off the top of my head. So these are my notes, and I'm going to follow them. And I will invite a few seaside singers here later as a kind of a last minute dedication to Al. What makes a long treasured friendship? I've been pondering about that, knowing that I wanted to pay tribute to Al. I love the photos, by the way, the photo that was chosen. It could not have been better. It just shows her joy in her place, and I especially love the walking shoes. There were a lot of details in the eulogy and the obituary, some of which I didn't know or had forgotten. It helped me recall over our own route into Homer. She didn't talk much about her pre-Alaskan days. So I didn't know about her early Girl Scout involvement and how much leadership she actually did as she grew older. I didn't know that Jim and Al came to Homer on their honeymoon, which she didn't mention that either, and that kind of brought me back because Don and I came to Homer on our honeymoon too. When it was 56, to look around like all of us do, you know, we look around and then, but we had business back, so we left, but I don't know how many people have gone over that hill overlooking the bay and said, if we can, we're coming back here. And eventually we did, in 62 actually. I did know that she was raised in Brooklyn, and it has made a number of people's comments, and this is mine. I also knew that she had a very subtle sense of humor. She was not a stand-up comedian, as we all know. She was very, very subtle. But I do remember several times when we were having a conversation and she wanted to emphasize a point where she'd get this twinkle in her eye. She'd launch into this heavy, unmistakable Brooklyn accent. She'd say a few words in that and then go back into her normal way of speaking, still with that twinkle in her eye. And it was just a very endearing quality about her because she wasn't up front center with it. She just sprang it on you every once in a while. And I'm not sure when Al and I met, nor the circumstances. I'm guessing it was around 64, shortly after Al and Jim returned to Homer, because we had made it back to Homer in 62 when Don was hired as a high school principal, and with toddler Ann in tow. I do recall a lot of Clymer Rhonda potlucks. with our zippering families, Anne, Julia, Emily, oh no, wait a minute, oh, Sharon's in there too, Sharon, Emily, Walter, and Mike. And we were just, we were raising our kids in those days and getting together, doing it in some way, in a lot of ways. We shared a lot of singing as members of the Seaside Singers. And there's a camaraderie when you have a small group of singers. We kind of like to keep track of one another. And so when Al moved to the hospital long-term care, we especially liked singing there because we knew that they would wheel her chair close to us so that she could take her part, and she did. Even though she could no longer talk, when she heard the familiar songs that she had sung with us, she brightened and sometimes mouthed some of the words with us. Through the years, we loved our music. We found that we had a lot of love for music, nature, hiking, and especially campfire songs. All the way from the playful, which I won't go into, many of us know some of them, and to the hauntingly beautiful. And so I'd like to end this tribute by inviting some of the Seaside Singers who, at the very last minute, said that they would sing with me a song that I treasure and I know Al treasured because it's actually in a 1956 songbook put out by the Girl Scouts and Girl Guides. And so many of you will know it too. So if you do, even with the mask, please hum along. And so I would invite Al and, Joni.
Arlene, which song is it?
It is Peace of the River. You will recognize it. I don't know if I don't think we want to do it in mic. Do we with this? I'd rather not have individual voices because the blend is so beautiful. Peace, I ask of thee, O river. Peace, peace, peace. When I learn to live serenely, cares will cease. From the hills I gather courage, visions of the days to be, strength to lead and faith to follow. All are given unto me. Peace I ask of thee, O river. Peace, peace, peace. For Al.
Let's all stand together as you're able to sing our closing song today. This is For the Beauty of the Earth, and you'll find this in your red hymnal again on page 92. And let's sing the first 4 verses. So page 92, and we will sing verses 1 through 4. This is For the Beauty of the Earth. On behalf of the family, we are grateful that you are here today and invite you downstairs for a reception to continue sharing memories. There are some packs of flower seeds as well as some of Alathea's note cards for you to take with you today. There's some tea and goodies down there as well. And there will also be the guest book. So if you didn't get a chance to sign as you came in, please do look for the table with the guest book so you can leave a note. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God turn his face towards you and give you lasting peace. Amen.